Welcome to the first episode of the Costume Garage. On this channel, I'm going to be giving you tips and tricks on how to make amazing Halloween costumes for your kids. I'm also going to show you techniques and materials to take your cosplay to the next level. So before we begin, why don't I give you just a little glimpse of what we're going to be making today. Alright, well, I hope that whets your appetite, and now you are as excited as I am to make some really cool stuff. But I want to say that I know along the way I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to screw up left and right, and that's okay, because even though I'm here ostensibly to try and teach you, this is just as much an opportunity for me to learn, to step outside of my comfort zone, and to do things that I'm not necessarily very good at and expand my knowledge base. So that's very exciting to me. I also wanted to say I don't know where you are watching this video, but from having traveled quite a bit, I know the biggest obstacle, the biggest hurdle to overcome a lot of times is just getting your hands on the raw materials and tools to make these costumes. So in that vein, I really want to stick to the DIY spirit, the idea of making something from nothing, and that's why the Costume Garage is just my garage. We're just working out of my garage with the tools that I have, the things that I have available to me, and I'm going to try and embrace that spirit of DIY, but meld it with professional methods and techniques that I use on a day-to-day basis that will help elevate our costumes, our creations to a professional level. Okay, are you ready? Let's dive in. Before we get started, there's somebody that I need to introduce you to, a close personal friend of mine. Hey there. Okay, hey, can you tell everybody what your name is? Arthur, that's great. Arthur, how old? Here, I'll hold it for you. Why don't we look over there? Arthur, can you tell everybody how old you are?
3 years old.
That's right, you're 3 years old. Arthur, do you like Halloween?
Yes.
Hey, buddy, come on back. Okay, so why do you like Halloween so much? Because there's lots of Halloween decorations. Okay. Is there another reason? Why do you like going trick-or-treating? There's decorations? What do you get when you go trick-or-treating?
Candy.
You get candy. Okay, that's great. All right, handsome. So have you been out for Halloween before? What were you when you went for Halloween? What were you?
A dragon.
Arthur was a dragon. And do you know what you want to be for Halloween this year? He wants to be Megasaurus. Is that what this painting is? That's your painting of Megasaurus?
And it doesn't have colors.
That's okay. We'll fix that. So handsome. Why don't we show the people exactly what Megasaurus is? Because Megasaurus is not exactly a household name. This is Megasaurus. If you're a fan of monster trucks, you might already be familiar, but for those of you who aren't, this is it. With the chassis of a Sherman tank, Megasaurus is a 46,000-pound T-Rex-inspired behemoth that can grab a car and lift it off the ground in its pincher arms, breathe fire from a flamethrower inside its mouth, and then tear the car apart with its jaws. Quite a sight. When Arthur saw a video of Megasaurus, it was love at first sight, and he told my wife and I in no uncertain terms what he wanted to be for Halloween this year. It's unlikely that I'm going to find a Megasaurus costume at Halloween City, so we have a complete build ahead of us. Alright, so now that we know what we're building, the big question is, how do we build it? I mean, there's no instruction manual on the internet for for how to make a Megasaurus costume, so where do we even begin? I'll tell you. We're going to start with design. Now, I know we know what Megasaurus looks like from videos and photo, but that doesn't mean that's what the costume's going to look like, and we have a lot of things we need to work out. We need to work out how it's going to fit on Arthur, we need to work out how it's going to function, and so all of that comes under design. So some people are going to think I'm going way overboard with the design, but I don't think so. Reason being is that the more time you spend on the design, the easier everything that comes after that becomes. So that said, I'm going to spend time doing a design in Photoshop, and then I'm going to go so far as doing a 3D model in Blender. Now both of these are pieces of software that require some know-how. So if you're unfamiliar with those pieces of software, that's fine. If you just want to work with a pen and paper, nothing wrong with that. But all of this is going to happen in the design phase. And when the design is done, then we can move on to the build. That's the fun stuff. That's where we get our hands dirty. That's where we're cutting, we're gluing, we're putting things together, we're making things. Love it. Once that is done, once we've made the costume, what comes next? Paint. Who doesn't love to paint? Who doesn't love getting their hands dirty and paint? I know I do. I hope you do too, because that's going to be a big step of the costume. Once it's painted, then there's only one thing left. Finishing touches. This is going to be like adding graphics, putting lights inside it. We'll see if maybe we can get the mouth to shoot fire. All of this we're going to call finishing touches. And once we've been through all of these steps, we've made our costume and you're all done. So to dive in, we're going to start right now with design. I'm going to start by just looking at Megasaurus and getting a general idea of how a person would fit inside. Right away, I can see that it's not a very good shape to put a person inside of. It's got this large base, but then the T-Rex body has a tiny little waist and a big bulbous torso. So Arthur's not going to fit inside the T-Rex part of it. We're going to need to take some liberties with the look of this in order to make the costume fit him. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the tank part up off the ground, which should give some room for Arthur's legs while he's walking. And I think I'm going to make the tank taller too, so his whole body's going to fit inside. I bet he's really going to enjoy if I can make the pincher arms move and if they can open and close, so I'm going to work on that. And doing all these things is going to make the costume bigger, but since the costume's hollow, it probably won't add too much weight. Since I'm already changing the look, I'm also going to go ahead and alter how the mechanical T-Rex head looks. Try to maybe make it look a little more interesting, maybe a little more robotic. And I'm thinking that we might be able to try to make some fake fire coming out of the mouth. We'll see what I can come up with there. Now why am I even bothering to make a 3D model of my toddler's robot costume? Well, the main reason is that I found it can be difficult to visualize all the sides and parts of a project if I'm just drafting in 2 dimensions. Looking here like at Megasaurus' layered neck, for example, it looks straightforward enough in my 2-dimensional sketch, but as soon as I begin modeling it in 3D, I see the pieces are a little more complex when they all get stacked together. And making this model is really going to save me time and headache when I get into the garage and start to cut pieces apart and start to assemble them, because I've already worked out exactly how the puzzle fits together. Now when I finish the 3D model, the next step is to take a snapshot of each view, front, side, top, and back, and then print out a full-size paper blueprint for us to work with. I cannot overstate how incredibly helpful it is to have an accurate, one-to-one scale blueprint of what you're making right in front of you while you work. Now, these prints that I got here, you can find them from any number of places online. You do a Google search for blueprints, a lot of places are going to come up that have very reasonable prices. These blueprints that I printed, I spent a total of $29. So with most specialty costumes, you're going to want some kind of body form to build on. But that's kind of unrealistic in your garage because it requires a lot of work. You have to take a life cast, or you need a mannequin. It's expensive. So for our purposes for this garage costume, we're going to try something a little simpler. For Arthur, what I had him do is I had him lay down on a piece of paper, and I traced him, just like you do in elementary school where you trace your hand, traced his whole body on a piece of paper, and I used that as a blueprint. For this costume, it's not critical that things fit him precisely because he's kind of swimming around inside the costume. And so I just need something that's a representation of him that I can hang the costume on to make sure it's in the right position, to make sure his head ends up where I want it in the costume. That's why I went for this. Simple. I took that tracing of paper of him, I cut it out, and then I just got a sheet of plywood, traced that onto the plywood, and cut it out with the jigsaw. Screwed it into this base, and we've got it's not super sturdy, but it's good enough for what we need to do. It cost about 15 bucks in lumber and a jigsaw, which I already had, so it didn't require any extra tools. And then we've got this. This is a kitty backpack. Bought it off of a online retailer you might have heard of, and it was I think $12 for this. And the reason I went with this is I looked at all sorts of different backpacks, but settled on this one because it was the heavy-dutiest backpack for a toddler that I could find. Interestingly enough, they don't make a lot of heavy-duty toddler backpacks. I guess there aren't a lot of toddlers doing camping and hiking, but so this is the heavy-dutiest one I could find because all of the weight of the costume, which we are trying to mitigate, but all that weight of the costume is going to be riding on this backpack, and so we want him to be able to be secure. And so now we have this, we can slide it in place. It might take a little effort to slide it over this wood because the wood doesn't give it all, but once we have it in place, we can clip it and cinch down the straps, and there we have a good representation of Arthur wearing the costume eventually, and now we can build off of this. How this backpack integrates to the rest of the costume, we can build while it's on here. We can end up holding the costume in place and work all that out without the need of having Arthur actually wear it himself. So this is a good base, a good place to start. So, we're gonna make this costume out of this. This is foam core. It's also known as foam board. Now, why are we going to use this stuff? There's 3 key reasons. Number 1, and most importantly, this is lightweight. It's really light, and so it's going to make the costume as comfortable as possible. Number 2, it's really sturdy. For its weight, you can't get anything that's sturdier. Number 3, it's paintable. You can apply paint right on the top, and so for those 3 reasons, this is the main ingredient for this costume. Now, what exactly is foam core? Foam core is a styrene core, as the name would suggest, that's sandwiched by a paper skin on either side. It comes in various thicknesses. This is 1/4 inch, but you can also get 1/2 inch, and it comes in different sheet sizes. You can get from your craft store, you can get a small piece that's maybe about this size, but you can go all the way up to like 8 foot by 4 foot sheets if you're using a lot. And it also comes in different colors. It comes in white like this. It also comes in black. So it might be available in some other colors, but I know for a fact white and black. Now, it's primarily used in photography and in framing for mounting pictures and prints too before they get put into a frame, but it's also used in model making. A lot of architects will make a scale model of a project in foam core. You've probably seen that scene in the movie where someone's standing over the model and the bad guy's about to do something. Well, it's usually foam core that's made out of. But it's also used in film, as I've come to use it, for models or prototypes or just roughing things together really quick, because foam core is quick, it's easy, and it's relatively inexpensive. So, and when you cut it, you can get really intricate shapes out of it. Where can you get foam core? Most art supply stores, craft stores, even photo supply places will carry foam core. Online, there are no shortage of retailers that sell this stuff, so you can get your hands on it pretty easily. At least here in the States. I can't speak internationally how available it is. I'm sure it is, but luckily I live in Los Angeles, California, and everything's at my fingertips. I know there's a lot of places where it's a lot harder to get things, so if you're having difficulty, maybe get in touch. I might be able to have some resources for you where you'll be able to find materials. So as I was saying, you're able to cut intricate shapes out of this stuff, which we don't need to do intricate shapes for this costume, but it's helpful to be able to cut straight lines. And in order to do that, we're going to be using sharp X-Acto knives or razor blades. Now, before we do that, we should have a note about safety. This is a costume for kids, but it's definitely not a costume that kids should be helping you with for the reasons of these sharp, sharp blades. They're super dangerous and they're not for kids to be around. But besides the blades, we're also going to be using hot glue. And hot glue guns and hot glue are dangerous. You can burn yourself. And so when you're working with these kind of tools and tools in general, you need to exercise good common sense. You need to exercise good safety practices. And that'll include using eye protection and ear protection when it makes sense to, and gloves when it makes sense to. A lot of this costume, if you're an adult and you know what you're doing, you won't require a lot of safety gear, but just in general, I want to emphasize you need, especially if there's any children around, you want to be cautious. If you're using a hot glue gun and there's a child around, keep it well out of their reach, make sure they can't get anywhere near it. Same with X-Acto knives, you want to keep them nowhere that they can get their hands on them, because an X-Acto knife will cut someone like that. Okay, we're gonna stop right there for a second, because after having watched my footage, I realized that I kind of glossed over some of the details about foam core. And since 90% of Arthur's costume is gonna be made out of foam core, I wanted to go more in depth, because it's a material that some of you might not be familiar with, and I feel like there's more information I could share. So for starters, I want to say, I said, oh, this is an ideal material. Well, while I think it's the best choice for Arthur's costume, I want to go over the pros and cons of foam core, because it might not be perfect for everybody. The pros are, it is lightweight, and it is easy to work with, and it's relatively inexpensive, and it does have some strength to it, but keep in mind that at its core, no pun intended, it's really just kind of sophisticated cardboard. So if you make your costume out of this and you go out and you bump into something or you trip and fall, there's a good chance it's going to break, or it's going to take a big dent, or it's going to take some damage. So I just want everybody to be aware that foam core, like I said, for this costume, it's, I think, the best choice, particularly because it's a costume for a 3-year-old and it's big, and so I need it to be lightweight, but it might not be perfect for everyone. There are other options out there, but for a budget Halloween costume, foam core is a great choice. So working with foam core, I touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to go more, like I said, more in depth. When you go to cut foam core, you're going to want to use the sharpest blade that you possibly can. You're going to want to use an X-Acto knife with fresh blades, or a razor blade, which also fresh blades, because as you're cutting through the foam core, your knife's going to be dulling. As you're cutting, it may only take a couple cuts before you notice the change in your blade. When you go to cut foam core, you want your knife to go right through it and make a nice, clean, perfect cut to actually cut the material, as opposed to tearing through the material. And if you start using a dull blade, you will notice it's going to start dragging, and some of that styrene filler is going to start catching, and you're not so much, like I said, cutting through it as like kind of hogging a hole through it. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure you've always got a nice sharp blade to get the best results out of the foam core. So X-Acto knife, like I said, good choice. You can find them in hobby stores, online, just about everywhere. And you want a nice solid selection of, not selection, but a nice number of blades, so you can keep swapping out your blades as they get dull. As they get dull, you're going to have a special container. In the medical industry, they call them sharps containers, but you're going to want a special container to dispose of those dull blades, because even though they're dull to cut through the foam core, they're going to be sharp enough that you can cut anybody else, and you specifically don't want to just throw dead blades into your trash, because someone could reach into the trash and get stabbed. These things have a notoriety for hurting people in that fashion, so you want to make sure they go in their own special container, a glass container, a plastic container that seals up so that those blades can't cut anybody. That said, also, when you go to cut this, you're not going to want to do this on your kitchen table. You're not going to want to do this on a sofa or any soft material. Like I've got this table here, but it's a padded table. You're going to want to have a cutting board, some surface that as you're cutting through this, the knife is terminating there and not going through to anything else. I literally just have a little project board I got from a home improvement store. That's good enough. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You want it relatively clean. I don't have much on here, but and then also, since our costume's a robot, it's got a lot of hard edges. It's got a lot of flat cuts. It doesn't have a lot of curved cuts, which is good because those are a lot easier. I'll get into that a little bit, but for flat cuts, you literally can just take a ruler. I like to actually take a pen and kind of plot out my cuts. This ruler, even though you get a nice straight edge, when you go to turn and do a 90 degree, you're kind of guessing. If you have a T-square, that'll help you because you can butt the T right up to the edge and make sure things are nice and 90 degrees. Make sure all your angles are right. You're not cutting it at an odd angle. And then I touch on it, I think, a little bit later, but I want to talk about it here as well. If you need to make something that has a compound curve, or just a curve, what you're going to want to do, you're going to make a series of slices. And those slices, you're not going to cut all the way through both sides of the foam core. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to literally just make a bunch of cuts that are very close together, but only go through one side of the foam core. And then when you've done a bunch of those cuts and you've gone through one side, you'll find that as you kind of take the two edges and fold it, all those little cuts will break apart and allow the foam core to flex into a curve. And then you can glue it into that curve, so that's how you achieve that. All right, so here we've got our hot glue gun. Right now, this one's bought it from a home improvement store. You can get hot glue guns all over the place. Art supply stores, home improvement stores. You can get these craft stores. Almost anyone's going to have a hot glue gun. You're probably going to want the kind that accept these larger size glue sticks because we're doing a lot of gluing. If you use the ones that have the little tiny craft glue sticks, you're going to be going through a lot of glue. It's going to be a big pain in the butt. So I suggest you go with one like this. This one has dual temperature setting. I want to set it to high because generally speaking, the low temperature setting doesn't really pump out much glue. But we're just going to demonstrate how you glue a couple pieces of foam core together. So I have these two pieces. There's lots of ways to go about it, but the way I like doing it is you have them lined up the way that you want them to be. In this case, kind of going to make a 90 degree. You're going to have them so they end up being forming a corner like that. And so what you want to do is you want to get it set up. If you can make it so that something else holds it and you don't have to hold it, so much the better. But this end obviously is the hot end. And you pull the trigger and dispense the glue. And you don't need a ton. The more surface area that you have, the less glue you need. Just a steady bead like that. And keep in mind, that's the hot end. That's the dangerous end of your hot glue gun when you got it plugged in. You don't want to touch that. You don't want to touch the hot glue when it comes out. Now, if you look in here, you can see the bead of clear hot glue. It's sitting there. And so we just have to wait for it to cool down. And then once it's cooled, then the glue has done its job. If you want, you can, to kind of improve your bond, you can kind of play with it a little like that, kind of settle it in place. And now we just got to play the waiting game until it's cooled, and then your glue will be all set. Like I said, do not want to touch the hot glue. And there are ways you can use to speed up the cooling process, but for our purposes, I think it's safer to just focus on not getting the hot glue on yourself, making sure you're not burning yourself with the glue gun. Those are key. And so we'll just wait this out for a couple more minutes, and then actually see it right now. Once it's starting to get tacky, a lot of times you can even let it sit on its own. Sometimes if its center of gravity is off a little bit, it might want to fall. But this looks like it's going to be okay. So within a few minutes, this is going to be cool to the touch, and the glue will be finished, and you can move on to your next piece. When it comes to working with the hot glue, there's a couple things you kind of want to avoid doing. As much as possible, you're going to want to work with gravity. When I say work with gravity, what I mean is you're going to want to glue things so that what your glue is going down onto a surface. You're not going to want to be gluing
upwards, where you're putting the hot glue into something where gravity's going to want to pull it out, because you want to avoid drips, because those drips could fall, if nothing else, on you. They can hurt you, they can hurt someone else, your kids, your pets. So you want to try and work with gravity as much as possible. So when it comes to this costume, I'm going to be building, as I start building, I'm going to constantly be turning it so that the surface that I'm gluing is on the bottom as much as possible. Now, there's some times where that might not be possible, but when I have to glue something fighting gravity, I'm going to make sure I'm wearing eye protection. I'm going to make sure that I'm being safe, so that if there are any drips, there's something to collect them that's not going to land on me. So you always have to be mindful of the safety when dealing with something that's like this, that's hot. And also another critical thing is when you're done gluing, or if you're taking a break from gluing, unplug your glue gun. Or this one doesn't have an on-off switch, but if you have an on-off switch, turn it off. Make sure that the minute you've stopped working with your hot glue, you turn it off so it cools down and is no longer presenting a danger.
So whenever you're trying to make something that's got function to it, whether like opening and closing or any kind of mechanical function, it's really a good idea to try and buy something pre-existing rather than make it from scratch. We're gonna do that today. Instead of trying to make the pinchers that grab cars and do all that, we're gonna try and buy something really cheap so that we can piggyback on the existing mechanical parts and not have to do that ourselves. So we've got this. We got these online. There's actually a pair of them for $11. Can't beat the price. There's no way I could make something for that cost that has the right function, which these do. You see it opens and closes. That's exactly what we want the pinchers to do. And the upside of these, and the reason I settled on these, is they're kid friendly. Made for children, so I know that Arthur's not going to get hurt. And it has the right function. They're lightweight. Win, win, win. This is exactly what we're looking for. So we're going to take these guys. We're going to probably cut the T-Rex head part off of it. So we've just got the function, and then we're going to clad them in our foam core we talked about before. We're going to hot glue the foam core around that, and we're going to end up with this. This is our finished claw. So it's the right size, it's the right shape, and it's going to do everything we want it to. Now, these aren't going to be super sturdy. The thing is, we're battling the weight versus the function, which we talked about a lot, how this thing needs to be lightweight. But so I've settled on this. It's not, I mean, you're not going to be able to pick up stuff with this, but it has the function, it has the look. Arthur's going to have a great time wearing this. That's all we need for our costume. Okay, so we've done a lot of work on the costume. We've got all of our parts cut out and most of them assembled. So I'm just going to kind of show them off a little bit. We'll start over here. These, using the black foam core, are the tracks that go on either side of the costume. They're mirrored, so they're identical. It's not 100% done yet, but you can kind of see the idea. How you achieve the curves on the foam core is, if you can see here, there's a whole series of slices done that don't cut all the way through the foam core, but just cut through the one side, and then you bend it and it kind of breaks, and that creates the curves in foam core. Over here, we've got Megasaurus' head. Again, I didn't attach it to the body yet because we're going to try to get a fan inside here and make some flames, but we're not 100% sure if that's going to happen. And you see down here, I left the front open because Arthur's head's going to be right here. I also cut these hatches, these windows on the side, so he can have some peripheral vision as well. Over here, we got our pinchers. Kind of already saw how those work. We got both our pinchers. These need to get installed in the body. But before we install any of these things, we're going to paint them so that it's a little easier to paint them when they're separate than when it's all together. Back here, this is the backpack. It looks a little different now. You'll see all these wooden dowels kind of sticking all over the place. And what those are what hold the suit up. So you can see this one, these ones will go to the back of the suit. This one goes straight up to the top, and these ones kind of go to the shoulders. And that's just basically, what we call them in the business is standoffs. So those stand off from Arthur to the outside of the costume, and that's what, the weight transfers from those to the backpack. So that all the weight, so when Arthur moves around, that's what carries it. You'll notice I did cheat a little bit. I tried to do everything kind of garage things you could buy at a home improvement store. I did cheat a little bit. I 3D printed these parts just because the wooden dowels I wanted to have here, I was afraid if I made them go straight to the backpack, the load might kind of create a pressure point. And so basically I made these parts that's dispersing the weight out over the shoulder band, so it's not just a point pushing right into him. So I did cheat a little bit on this costume, but that's what's going on. So, and then over here we have the body. The biggest part, the whole torso. So this hole right here, Arthur's head's gonna be right here. The head's gonna attach here. These holes right in the front, that's where the pinchers go. I made some flat slots, and that's what the pinchers are gonna mount in there. And then also because Arthur's probably gonna be a little wobbly when he's walking, I wanted to make sure we were able to help him. And so I made these little hatches, one on either side, that we just swing open. So Arthur can stick his hands out and we can hold his hands while he's walking. And then the back side, we've got the rockets that I've mocked up the look of the rocket on Megasaurus. These little cones, instead of printing or doing anything crazy, I just found a model rocket company that made these. They were $4 a piece. Super simple. They're glued in place, and they're so if we take a look at what's going on the inside, you can see it's mostly hollow, but then you'll see these 5 pieces of PVC pipe. So that PVC pipe is just cut down that you get from a home improvement store, and the wooden dowel that's on the backpack sleeves right into those. So to get Arthur in the costume, we're going to take this body, he's going to be wearing the backpack, and we're going to just drop it right over the head, and then just make sure all these wooden dowels slot into that PVC, and then he's wearing his costume. And the nice thing about that is that to get him out, you just pick it up, straight off him again. So it's kind of easy in, easy out. Anyway, that's the construction of most of it. You can see all of our foam core pieces. You can see, if you look closely, you can kind of see beads of hot glue along all the seams. That's how all this is held together, just with hot glue. So almost all these pieces, all that's in them are foam core and hot glue. And now we're ready to paint and do the final assembly, and then we will put some graphics on it and the costume's going to be done. So now I want to go back and talk about the painting of the foam core a little bit more, which I glossed over a little bit, said, yeah, it's great, it's easy to paint, it turns out fantastic. True on its surface, but let's talk about it a little more in depth. So we are going to be painting this foam core with this. It's a Krylon, it's a lacquer-based chrome paint. That's going to be our base to make it kind of look metal. This stuff's pretty good. As far as what you can buy from a store or online, this is about as good as you can get before you start getting into industrial paints, like automotive paints. This stuff, certainly for a Halloween costume, good enough. Like I said, lacquer-based. So this kind of paint, you're going to be wanting to spray outdoors. You're going to be spraying this in a well-ventilated area. You're not going to want to be doing this indoors at all. Nowhere indoors. In terms of, even though I'm working in my garage, we're going to move this outdoors to do the painting because you don't want the smell. First of all, it's not healthy for you. You don't want the smell accumulating. You want to be in the best ventilated area possible. If you don't have those kind of facilities, then aerosol paints are not for you. You're going to use something like acrylic, which is not going to have the same kind of health ramifications. But we're going to be using this now. In terms of what it does to the foam core itself, even though it's okay with paint, it accepts it. One thing to note is you really have to be sure to give yourself enough time from the point where you're painting to the point where you're actually going to be using the costume. Because if you're painting this the night before Halloween or the day of your Halloween party, you are going to have problems. This paint, it takes, even though it says it takes 15 to 30 minutes to dry, that's not dry. That's dry to the touch. But what it really needs is at least a day, 24, even 48 hours to really set on your foam core, to really, as we just say, cure. It really needs time for the paint to reach its maximum dryness before you start wearing it. If
you paint something with this and you go out within that window before you've waited that long, there's a very good chance your paint's going to be rubbing off on whatever it comes in contact with, whether it be your skin, your clothing, whatever. There's a very good chance when you put it in your car, on your upholstery. So just want you to be aware, you really need to make sure you give yourself enough time from the time you're going to paint to the time you're going to wear this costume to let it really settle in. And so this paint we're going to use as our base. That's going to be our base metal color. And then over the top of that, we'll be spraying some other colors to kind of, any paint job, it requires multiple colors to give it depth, to give it some dimension. And so we'll probably, because this costume is really just metal, or looks metal, it'll just be a colors that add like the suggestion of rust and age and weathering onto it on top. So probably just like a brown and then a black. And we'll be using acrylics so that it's not as toxic and it's easy to manipulate when I'm working with it. So that's the primer on paint.
So now the costume's assembled. You can see the entire piece has been based out in the chrome spray paint, except for the tracks, which are black and white, with some parts that are painted with a yellow spray paint. I'm painting with an automotive touch-up gun that's connected to my air compressor, and I'm using non-toxic acrylic paints, which is why you'll see I'm not wearing a respirator, and I'm painting inside the garage and not outside where there's better ventilation. I'm concentrating the paint on the edges and corners of the costume, and I'm letting the paint accentuate the base color that's already there and not completely obscure it. You want the layers of paint to be adding to one another and you don't want to obliterate what's already there underneath it. You want it to be an accumulation of colors. When this paint is all dry, all that's going to be left is to add the graphics.
Alright, so we've constructed the costume, we've painted the costume. What's left is what I'm calling finishing touches. Now, I had a fitting with Arthur a few days ago and saw some things I didn't really like about the costume, saw some changes I wanted to make, so I did a little, I guess it would be construction, but I'm going to lump it in here into finishing touches. We're going to start talking about those changes before I talk about the last little tidbits that kind of make your costume complete 100%. So, what did I do? Tried the costume on Arthur and saw that even though this costume weighs 9.5 pounds, I think that's pretty light, he was kind of struggling. I didn't think he was going to be able to go trick-or-treating all around the block wearing this costume because even though it's only 9.5 pounds, he's only 3 years old. And so it's really a cumbersome big costume and he was having trouble. I think the fact that he was wearing kind of a tight harness, something he didn't enjoy, and so I went back to the drawing board a little bit. Here what I did is I decided rather than him wearing a harness and have him walk, why not make it so it's a little more free floating. You can see what I did is I ripped out the backpack that he had to wear and these standoffs that supported the weight, ripped all of it out, and then made a wooden base with 4 casters, so it's got wheels now. He can just climb inside. He can just climb inside there in this wooden base. He stands in there. I lift the costume over him, drop it into place, and he uses the handles like steering wheels, and he can push, and away he goes. So, did that. Turns out he likes this a whole lot better. I should have thought it through at the front. Should have been thinking about a 3-year-old, but my world, I'm used to building costumes that where it functions for the movie, and I'm not. And comfort is not always the most important concern, even though it is a concern. And so I was really ambitious. Didn't really think of who was going to be wearing it 100%, and so I've come back to this, had a little trial run, loved it, and so this is the route we're going to go. So now that the construction is really finished, now we'll talk about the finishing touches, the little accoutrements that are going to make this costume complete. And I finished them, but we'll just go over it. So for starters, we've got the graphics. There's the Megasaurus logo, the radiation symbol,
Both of these I was able to find on the internet. Just a simple Google search turned up the Megasaurus logo. Once I got that on my computer, I saw it was pretty low resolution, not really a suitable image for much of anything. So I took that image into Photoshop, did a little doctoring to clean it up, and once that cleanup was complete, printed it out. Just some regular standard white paper, nothing fancy. And then once the print was complete, I laminated that, cut it out, and here you go. Here's the logo, laminated and double stick taped to the side of the costume. Same with the radiation symbol. Google image search, no shortage of the radiation symbols printed out, done. Other little thing I did is this caution tape you see in a couple places. Found a roll of caution tape online. It was only a few bucks. The only thing I did to this was that the color really goes for these extended stretches, and I wanted it to be smaller, so I literally cut it by hand to get the caution tape to have the spacing that I wanted. It wasn't too much work, it only took a few minutes. And that's that. Those are the graphics. I took just a regular old Sharpie pen and added some detail to the treads just to make them look a little more interesting, to give them a little more life. And that is all the graphics. Now we can get into other finishing touches. So for Megasaurus's eyes, I got these little tea lights. Found them on online retailer. I forget what I want to say they were $13. I could be wrong about that, but there are a lot of options. These little tea lights are remote controlled, so you can turn them on and off with the remote. It was great, so I could, when we went out trick-or-treating, I could turn them on and off, just and kept this remote in my pocket. They're almost weightless, which is good. The only thing, they themselves are weightless. The batteries add weight to them, but not too bad. These are definitely just a few ounces a piece. All I did was take some duct tape, some heavy-duty duct tape, and taped them to the inside. That's all there is to that. That's pretty straightforward. Real simple, on, off, boom, done. Love it. And that was it. Lights always add a lot to your Halloween costume because when you're out in the dark, the lights are the first thing people see. They don't know. A lot of the other details just go away when you're in a dark room or when you're outside. So one more thing to talk about is the fire breathing. Something that I really wanted to do from the get-go, but ultimately we abandoned it. And here's the reason, is that costume only weighs 9.5 pounds, which is great. It's a nice lightweight, but it's a lot of it is up here and in the front. The costume is really front heavy. There's almost no weight in the back. And so when Arthur was walking around, I could see he was really struggling because it was throwing his balance off. And so as light as this nice battery operated remote control fan is, it still has weight. I mean, I haven't weighed it. I'm gonna guess it's definitely less than a pound, but when you take something that's even less than a pound and hold it way out here, or out here in the case as the case may be, it feels exponentially heavier than it actually is. And so I decided that the benefit of having the flames coming out of the mouth was not great enough to add this extra weight, which was just going to make the costume even more difficult for him to control. So we ditched it. We pitched it. A nice remote control, battery operated fan. We'll probably use it sometime in the future, but not for this costume. So that's everything. Costume's 100% done. Why don't I show you some footage of Arthur in action?
Watch where you're going. You almost fell. Let's keep it up here.
I can look out the window.
Are you looking out the window?
Yes.
Do you like your costume?
Yes, I can look out the window of my great big machine.
So that's it. That's the Megasaurus costume. Before I sign off, let's talk about the final figures. Even though it's kind of hard to calculate, my best estimate is that I spent about a week's worth of time building this costume. That's 8-hour days for a week. Now, it was done over the course of a month and a half on my evenings and weekends, but I work a full-time job, I'm a dad, so that's how it came together. The cost is a little bit easier to track because I've got all the receipts. So for Megasaurus, I spent $285 out of my pocket. It's a little bit more than I would have liked to spend, and part of that is because I chased some rabbit holes that didn't pan out. Fire breathing. But in the end, that's what I spent. Arthur had a great time. It was worth every penny. So that's the post-mortem, if you will, on how much it cost and how much effort and time I had to put into it. That's the end of this video. I hope that you learned something. I hope that some of the things I've talked about have inspired you or maybe informed you on how to make things of your own, some cool stuff. And I hope that you'll tune in for my other videos because I've got some really cool stuff brewing. There's going to be more videos to come. And thank you so much for watching.